The American Journal of Nursing published a study in 2010. Over 60% of palliative care nurses admitted to encountering end-of-life visions in their patients. Lights at the end of a tunnel, departed relatives, quiet conversations with an empty corner of the room. They documented it, discussed it at conferences, but there was one question they unanimously avoided. They were silent about something else, about how sometimes these visions didn't only happen to the dying, and about how sometimes that which comes for them decides to stay, to greet new patients, or just to observe. Welcome to the night shift. Turn off the light. Listen to the silence. It is never truly complete here. The smell hit him first when the elevator doors opened on the third floor. It wasn't a single smell, but a layered pie of despair. The top layer, the caustic, almost sweetish sterility of bleach and alcohol. Beneath it, a thin but stubborn note of old blood, ingrained in the seams of the tile floor and tarnished metal. And the foundation, the heavy, warm scent of human sweat, fear, and bodily fluids. The air was cold, artificial, like from a morgue's air conditioner. Leo Garner, a trainee nurse, squeezed his folder of patient histories until his knuckles turned white. His first independent night shift in the intensive care unit. The white walls, illuminated by the bluish light of fluorescent lamps, seemed endless. A hum, the eternal low-frequency hum of electricity, ventilation, and his own blood in his ears. The beeping of heart monitors was like metallic cicadas counting down someone's final seconds. His route took him past room 302. The room was empty. The patient, an old man with a massive heart attack, had been sent to the pathology department 2 hours ago. Leo himself had helped him zip him into the black bag, feeling the cooling, waxy pliability of the skin through his gloves. The door to the room was slightly ajar. From inside came a steady, monotonous sound. Beep, beep. Leo froze. It was the sound of a heart monitor in standby mode, a simulation, but no one should have turned it on. The orderlies were supposed to have disconnected all the equipment. His mouth went instantly and completely dry. He pushed the door open. Cold. The room was noticeably colder than the hallway. A strange draft, impossible in a sealed unit, licked at his neck. The room was empty. The bed was made with fresh, gray-white hospital linen, stretched to a painfully smooth tautness. But on the wall above the bed, a monitor was alive and breathing. Its greenish screen glowed brightly in the semi-darkness. A steady line of an electrocardiogram ran across it. Not a straight line, but one with rare, heavy, ugly peaks. Beep, beep. Heart rate 12 beats per minute. Blood pressure 80/40 and falling. A glitch, Leo whispered to himself, and the words seemed laughably childish in this freezing silence. His senior colleagues, Bill and Martha, loved to tease the newbie. Last shift, they sent him to sterilization for a sharpened rectal thermometer. He inhaled, walked up to the monitor, found the reset button, a big red one, pressed it. The screen went dark for a second. Silence struck his ears. Then it lit up again, the same rhythm, the same data, but now a different parameter was blinking at the bottom of the screen. Bed weight. The numbers were ticking, slowly, inexorably. 0.0 kilograms, 0.0 kilograms, 5.4 kilograms, 12.8 kilograms. Leo's heart was hammering somewhere in his throat. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the bed. And then he saw it. The perfectly taut sheet in the center of the mattress began to sag, slowly, almost imperceptibly, as if an invisible bubble was inflating beneath it. The dip deepened, forming the outlines of a body, but not quite. The dents from the shoulder blades were too sharp, unnatural. Where the waist should be, there were two curves, like an extra set of ribs. and the imprint resembling a thigh was crooked, as if a joint was twisted at an impossible angle. The shape was human, but assembled from a memory of human, assembled incorrectly. On the monitor, the steady green line suddenly jumped, drawing one last convulsive peak, V-fib, and turned into a flat, lifeless horizontal line. A long, continuous beep. The silence after that sound was deafening. A ringing filled his ears. Leo stood paralyzed, staring at this silent testimony of a death that couldn't be. And then he heard it, right by his right ear, a loud, wet, drawn-out inhale. The smell changed. A sweetish, putrid scent, like from a vase where flowers had stood too long, was added to the chemical sterility. Leo didn't turn around. He couldn't. His muscles had turned to stone. He only felt the cold draft, now concentrated and deliberate, blowing on his neck, creeping under the collar of his scrubs. He understood. The thing that had lain on the bed, measured by the weight sensors and left imprints on the sheet, was now standing right behind him, and it was breathing.
The pediatric oncology ward at St. Jude's Hospital smelled of hope that was on the verge of spoiling. The sweet scent of disinfectant mixed with the aroma of chocolate pudding from the cafeteria and something vaguely medicinal. The walls were painted with rainbows, smiling suns, and clowns, but the paint was peeling in the corners, revealing old gray plaster. Sarah Morgan walked down the corridor, holding the leash tightly. At her feet trotted Buddy, a golden retriever the color of ripe wheat, the epitome of calm and good nature. His job was to place his shaggy head on the laps of sick children, taking all their pain and fear into his shiny chocolate eyes. But Buddy was uneasy now. His ears were pinned back, his tail was down, and his body was tense as a cable. He was whimpering softly, taking quick, snuffling breaths. "Easy, boy, easy," Sarah murmured, but her own stomach had tightened into a knot. They were approaching room 417, the angel room, as the nurses called it. That's where Lily was, a 7-year-old girl who had fallen into a coma after a complication from chemotherapy. A sweet, quiet girl with pale, petal-like hair spread across the pillow. The doctors could only shrug. The chances were minimal. But Buddy, who usually raced to any child wagging his tail, now planted all 4 paws firmly. He recoiled from the threshold as if from an electric fence and growled, low, deep, from the very depths of his throat, a sound Sarah had never heard him before. "Buddy, what's wrong?" Her voice trembled. She peered into the room. Lily lay motionless. Her chest rose and fell rhythmically under the thin pajamas. Drawings sent by her classmates stood on the bedside table. In one of them, the brightest, a family was drawn, a mother, a father, a girl. But all 3 had just yellow ovals for faces, empty, without eyes, mouths, or noses. Sarah, deciding to check the dog's instincts, crouched down and looked under the bed. And she saw not rat poison, but small, white, sharp objects scattered across the floor. Baby teeth. Dozens of baby teeth. They lay there like scattered confetti. And Buddy, having caught their scent, howled. The next day, Sarah returned, determined to be firmer. She led Buddy into the room, feeling him tremble all over. The girl lay just as still, and then Buddy snapped. He tore off the leash, but didn't lunge at the bed. He stood between Sarah and Lily, crouched low on the cold linoleum he usually hated, and he began to bark, not at the girl, at the air around her. He bared his teeth, made sharp lunges, biting at the emptiness, jumped back as if batting off a swarm of invisible, persistent insects. His movements were hysterical, defensive. "Buddy!" "Stop!" Sarah screamed, grabbing his collar. In that same instant, she caught a glimpse of Lily. The girl's mouth, always slightly open because of the breathing tube, suddenly twitched. The corners of her lips pulled down, and then her jaw, without any muscular effort, dropped. It dropped unnaturally low, like a snake's preparing to swallow its prey whole. For a split second, the dark slit of her mouth became a black, bottomless hole on her pale little face. Numb with shock, Sarah pulled the trembling dog out of the room. In the hallway, under the bright lights, she knelt before him, hugging his neck, trying to calm both him and herself. And then, her fingers felt something wet and sticky in his thick fur, right under his jaw. She parted the fur. On Buddy's skin, on the tender pinkish skin, was a clear, small bruise. Not from an animal's claw or bite. It was the imprint of human teeth. Perfect, tiny semicircles of upper incisors. Child's teeth. Baby teeth. Buddy yelped when she touched the bruise and pressed his head against her chest, trembling. Sarah sat on the cold floor, stroking him, and stared at the door of room 417. Now she understood why the dogs refused to go inside. They didn't see an angel. They saw what was sitting on the angel's chest, and what had apparently decided to have a snack. Dr. Victor Hayes felt sand under his eyelids. Not sand, but fine, prickly ground glass. Insomnia was an old friend, and the last few weeks had made it clingy, like a shadow. His hands, usually so firm and confident in the operating room, now trembled slightly. He hid them in the pockets of his white coat, clenching them into fists until his nails dug into his palms. Pain helped, a little. The small white pills in the locked drawer of his desk helped too, leftovers from his back surgery 2 years ago. He didn't abuse them, just maintaining his levels, as he told himself. His office was tiny, stuffy. The faucet in the corner sink dripped, methodically, once every 3 seconds. Drip, drip, drip. The sound ate into his brain. On the shelf behind him, among medical atlases and awards, stood an old, dusty jar of formaldehyde. In it, like a bizarre pickled cucumber, floated an amputated human hand, a gift from the department head, a lover of dark jokes. Grayish skin, fingers deformed by arthritis, frozen in an eternal, clumsy grasp. He tried not to look at it. And now, his new patient, Michael Ross. Amputation of the left hand below the elbow after an industrial accident. Standard procedure, everything went well. But Michael, pale with clammy sweat on his forehead, wasn't talking about pain.
"Doc," he whispered, staring at the empty space under the blanket where his hand should be. "Constantly, like I stuck it in a freezer. And it itches. No, not itches. It scratches. Wood. It's scratching wood, you understand? I can hear the sound. A scraping." Victor nodded, mechanically writing in the chart. Pronounced phantom limb syndrome, tactile and thermal hallucinations. Recommended gabapentin, psychotherapy consult. He wrote the prescription, said the standard words of comfort, but something inside him clenched. Scratches wood. Too specific. Michael's night screams began on the 3rd day, piercing, animalistic howls that froze the blood of the entire staff. When Victor burst into the room, Michael was sitting on the bed, shaking, staring in horror at his healthy right hand. On his forearm, just above the wrist, 4 blue, almost black bruises were clearly visible, shaped like finger pads, and one long one, from a thumb. The imprint of someone's left hand, which had gripped him with such force that capillaries had burst. An imprint that would perfectly match Michael Ross's amputated hand. For the first time in a long while, an icy needle of fear pierced the familiar fog in Victor's head. He checked the biological waste disposal log. The hospital's crematorium, a small old furnace in the basement, had broken down a week ago.
All amputated limbs, tissues, placentas, everything was being placed in sealed bags and stored in the refrigerator in the basement awaiting repairs. The basement. The elevator wasn't working. Victor descended a narrow, creaking staircase, lighting his way with his phone's flashlight. The air became thick, cold and damp, smelling of damp earth, formaldehyde, and something sweetly rotten. He found a door marked Biostorage, staff only. The rusty handle gave way with difficulty. Inside it was dark and cramped. A row of low refrigeration units hummed like dying animals. Plastic containers and yellow biohazard bags, neatly labeled, stood on metal shelves. His flashlight beam picked out labels from the gloom. Necrotic tissue, leg. Placenta, 34 weeks. Amputated hand, left, Ross M. The bag with Ross's name wasn't on the shelf. It was on the floor, in a puddle of dark, almost black fluid. It was torn open. Fingers protruded from the hole, gray, stiff, with broken nails. Holding his breath, he crouched down. His flashlight trembled in his hand. Michael Ross's hand wasn't just lying in the bag. It was gripping. With its dead, stiffened fingers, it was clutching something else with a wild, inhuman strength. Another amputated hand, a woman's, slender, from a neighboring bag. The fingers of the dead hand had dug into the dead flesh, squeezed, torn the skin, exposing tendons and white bone fragments. This was no accident. It was strangulation. A mindless, lifeless limb was trying to strangle another mindless, lifeless limb in the dark of the cold storage. Victor recoiled, hitting his head on a shelf. Something fell from above. Another bag. It landed beside him, and Victor saw its contents, something dark and shapeless, stir inside, stretching the yellow plastic. And then he heard it, from all sides, from under the refrigerator doors, from the shelves. A quiet, dry, scraping sound, as if dozens of fingers without nails were slowly, persistently scratching at frosty metal and hard plastic. He ran out, slammed the door, and rushed up the stairs without looking back. But the sound, that terrible, familiar scraping, followed him. It was in his ears. And now, sitting in his office, pouring water with trembling hands, Victor Hayes understood it wasn't a hallucination. His own right hand, the one that had betrayed him with its shaking, lay on the table, and on its wrist, just above the cuff of his coat, a faint, pink mark had just appeared. It was slowly darkening, taking the shape of someone's fingers. The security monitor room at St. Luke's Hospital was a kingdom of shadows and flickering blue screens. 16 grainy black and white frames, like old photographs, showed empty hallways, sleeping wards, entrance doors. Samuel Currigan, the night shift guard, stared at them with eyes glazed over from fatigue. The radio crackled softly in his ears, occasionally grumbling with someone's sleepy voice. The air smelled of dust, overheated electronics, and cold coffee that had been sitting in a cracked mug for hours. His attention was drawn to one window, the camera in the elevator lobby of the old B wing. The elevator there was ancient, with sliding iron doors. They'd been wanting to replace it for ages. And right now, exactly at 3:07 a.m., its indicator above the door lit up. The floor needle, an old mechanical one, clicked and turned. Not to 1, not to B1, basement. It turned to a position not on the diagram. On the dimly lit dial, a faded inscription could be made out. B2. Glitching, Sam muttered, but something hooked him. He rewound the footage. Every night this week, exactly at 3 o'clock, the elevator arrived on the first floor. The doors opened to emptiness, stayed open for a minute, and closed. Then it went to this -2nd floor, and didn't return until morning. Curiosity, that rusty spring in the brain of a bored man, tightened more powerfully than fear.
Homeless people keeping warm, he decided, even though the basement only held old archives in the boiler room.
He took his heavy flashlight and baton, feeling their familiar, reassuring weight, and headed to Wing B. The lobby was plunged into a thick, damp silence. The flashlight beam picked out peeling paint, cobwebs in the corners. The elevator waited, its doors closed. Sam pressed the call button. Somewhere in the shaft, a motor started with a dry grind. The elevator descended from above, creaking and groaning. The doors slid open with a reluctant rumble. Inside smelled of iron rust, oil, and earth. Damp, freshly dug earth. He entered. The cab was old, paneled with cracked wood and yellowed linoleum. The floor panel, buttons from 1 to 5, and one at the very bottom, unmarked, just black, sunken like a blind eye. Sam pressed it. The doors closed. The elevator jerked and began to descend. It went on for too long. The basement should have been just a couple of meters down, but the needle on the indicator had long since passed B1, and the descent continued. The air grew thicker, colder, saturated with moisture and an organic, almost meaty smell, like a cellar where raw meat had been stored for a long time. The elevator finally stopped. The doors didn't open immediately. Sam heard a sound from outside, a dull, rhythmic glug, 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 as if a giant heart was beating in mud. The doors slid apart. Instead of a concrete basement, a tunnel lay before him, low, vaulted, dug right into the earth. Its walls weren't static. They pulsed with a faint, pinkish light, as if blood flowed under a thin film of clay. From there, from the walls, emanated that very smell of raw flesh, decay, and wet earth. Objects stood along the tunnel. Old iron gurneys on tall wheels, rusty, with leather straps. On them lay figures. Sam, struggling to breathe, stepped forward. The ground underfoot was soft, sticky. He shone his flashlight on the nearest gurney. What lay on it had once been a person, but now it was a fusion of 2, maybe 3 bodies. A monstrous seam of crude black surgical staples ran from one torso's shoulder to another's side. Heads were stitched to shared shoulders at unnatural angles, faces flattened, mouths open in silent screams choked with dirt. Arms and legs protruded from torsos in random places like branches of an ugly tree. These weren't corpses. They were part of the tunnel. From their backs, from the seams, grew roots of the same pinkish, pulsing substance that made up the walls. They were built into this living, breathing flesh of the underworld. Sam began to shake. He stumbled back, tripping over something soft. It was a pile of discarded medical gowns and instruments from the 40s and 50s, covered in mold.
And then the radio on his chest crackled to life. "Sam! Sam, where are you?" "Over." The voice of his shift partner, Tom, sounded anxious. Sam, with trembling hands, brought the radio to his mouth. "I'm in the old wing. In the basement. You won't believe." "Sam, listen carefully," Tom interrupted, panic in his voice. "We found you. In the elevator shaft in Wing B. You fell. An hour ago. We just called an ambulance. Your body, Sam, your body is here." A cold sharper than any he had ever felt pierced Sam. He turned to the elevator. The doors were closed. The call button was dark. He rushed to them, started pounding on the cold metal. "No, I'm here! I'm right here!" From the radio, now through rising static, came Tom's last distorted voice. "Not moving. God, he's staring right at us, with empty eyes." The light in the elevator went out. Only the beam of his flashlight remained, trembling on the pulsing walls of the tunnel. And then, slowly, with a quiet squeak of rusty wheels on wet earth, one of the gurneys behind him began to move.
The isolation room in the psychiatric wing smelled different each time, sometimes of urine and despair, sometimes of medicine and melancholy, but David Keller's room smelled of rotting apples, a sweetish, thick, pervasive scent of decay that hung in the air despite sterile cleanings and a working ventilation system. Dr. Anna Rice wrinkled her nose upon entering. Her own perfume, light floral notes, instantly gave way to that strange organic stench. David sat on the bed, his back against the wall. He was pale as an albino, but his skin wasn't unhealthy. It just seemed unworn. His fingers, long and thin, scraped incessantly at his own forearm, flaking off thin white shavings of dry skin. Scratch, scratch, scratch. The sound was as much a part of the room as the ticking of a clock. "I am dead, Dr. Rice," he said calmly, his voice devoid of any inflection. His eyes looked through her. "I am rotting from the inside. This body, it's just a suit someone put on and forgot to take off. If you try to fix it, if you make the heart beat louder, the lungs breathe deeper, you will seal it here, forever. And what's inside won't be able to get out, and it will get angry." Anna nodded, taking notes on her tablet. Delusion of negation, pure Cotard syndrome, depressive phase, possibly schizoaffective disorder. She prescribed a new course of antidepressants, and when they didn't work, approved electroconvulsive therapy. A gentle, modern protocol, all in the name of science, in the name of saving him. She observed the first procedure through the glass. David was laid down, anesthetized, sensors attached. When the current passed through his brain, his body arched in a silent convulsion. The monitors beside him, tracking his vital signs, suddenly blared alarms. The ECG line first twitched erratically, then slowed. 30 beats, 20 beats, 10 beats, and turned into a flat green line. Blood pressure dropped to 0. Oxygen saturation, 0. Clinical death had set in. The nurses rushed to resuscitate him, but Anna, frozen by the glass, saw something else. David's eyes were open. They were staring right at her, and his lips, without muscle assistance, breathless, were moving. "Stop!" she shouted, bursting into the procedure room. Everyone froze. The monitors showed zeros, but David, on the table, turned his head. His neck made a dry crack. His voice was quiet, echoless, like a sound from a deaf dungeon. "See, nothing has changed. The suit just got a little rumpled." He was dead by all medical parameters, but he was speaking. He wasn't breathing, his heart wasn't beating, but he sat and looked at them. Panic, cold and rational, gripped Anna. She ordered x-rays, all of them.
Of the chest, abdomen, skull. David's body was taken on a gurney. He lay motionless, but his eyes followed every movement. When the images appeared on the screen, a dead silence fell over the radiology room. The images showed no skeleton, no lungs, heart, stomach, brain. Inside the contour of the human body, beneath the skin and muscles, was only a solid, perfectly black, dense mass. It did not transmit the rays, it absorbed them. It wasn't emptiness, it was a fullness of something so alien that the X-ray could not capture it. And this blackness, Anna would have sworn, on one of the chest images, pulsed faintly. She returned to the isolation room, where David was already sitting on his bed. The smell of rotten apples had become unbearable, thick as syrup. He looked at her and smiled, but the smile wasn't his. It was an exact copy of her own smile, the restrained, professional one she used to calm patients. The corners of the lips lifted precisely as much as hers did. And then he spoke. But the voice was her own,
a perfect imitation recorded and reproduced from the depths of that black mass. Tone, timbre, the slight hoarseness from fatigue. "There are two of us now, Anna," her own voice said from the dead man's mouth. "He got out of his suit, and he liked yours." Anna felt something inside her chest clench sharply, then snap. A sharp, freezing pain, a familiar symptom. Her heart, which she had worked on so much, beat one last time and stilled. She clutched her chest, her mouth opening in a silent scream. Darkness crept in from the edges of her vision. She felt her knees buckle, but the fall never came. She remained standing. Her heart was not beating. In her chest was an emptiness, cold and strangely spacious. And before her eyes, in the eyes of David the suit, she saw her reflection. And she saw how her own real lips slowly, against her will, stretched upward, copying that very same professional, restrained smile. The hum was all-pervasive. It didn't just sound in the ears, it vibrated in the bones, in the teeth, filled the skull with a viscous metallic ring. Jacob, a ventilation technician, crawled through the main duct of Mercy Hospital, lighting his light with a headlamp. The space was narrow, circular, just slightly larger than the span of his shoulders. The walls coated in ancient dust and greasy soot, peeling in rusty flakes. The air smelled of dust, ozone, and something sweetly sour, like spoiled milk. The complaints came from the surgical wing. At night, a child's crying was heard from the vents.
Thin, piercing, heart-wrenching, but the maternity ward was at the other end of the complex. "Cats," Jacob muttered to himself, squeezing further along. "Always cats." And his theory was confirmed. Around a bend, at the junction of two pipes, he found a nest. Old rags, tufts of fiberglass, and in them, 4 blind, squeaking kittens. He sighed with relief mixed with irritation. "There's your crying, doctors." He carefully gathered the kittens into his bag to take them outside, but as soon as he did, the crying resumed. It wasn't coming from the nest. It was pouring from deep within the ventilation, from where the pipe narrowed and vanished into pitch blackness. This crying was different, not a squeak, but actual sobbing, guttural, choking, full of such sorrow and terror that a cold sweat broke out on Jacob's back. He shouldn't have gone further, but he was a technician, and somewhere down there a damper could be clogged or a fan broken. He crawled on. The pipe narrowed so much that the steel ribs dug into his back, even through his overalls. The hum of the fans became deafening. The crying drew closer, then receded, as if its source was moving. Jacob stopped at a fork. One pipe went up, the other down into absolute blackness. The crying came from below. He took an umbrella camera on a flexible cable from his belt, connected it to his tablet. Let's see what the hell is down there. He sent the camera into the lower pipe. On the tablet screen, rusty walls, icicles of grime flashed by, and suddenly the texture changed. Rust gave way to something smooth, yellowish white, with regular pores and lines. Jacob squinted, guiding the camera closer. It was bone, a human rib bone set into the wall of the pipe. Further, more, a shoulder blade, fragments of skulls. The duct in this section wasn't made of sheet metal. It was stitched, fused together from human skeletons, laid in a dense layer. Their cavities formed the tunnel. The camera hit a dead end. The dead end was also made of bone, and in it, curled into a ball, sat a creature. It was the size of a large dog, but its proportions were embryonic. A huge head, short, twisted limbs, a large, bloated belly.
Its skin was translucent, gray-blue, dark vessels pulsing beneath it. And its face? The face was the face of a very old, emaciated man. Deep wrinkles, sunken eyes, a toothless, caved-in mouth. But the eyes were open, and they were staring directly into the camera lens. The creature stirred. Its aged, cracked mouth slowly opened, and to the tablet, through the camera's microphone, came a whisper, hoarse, mucus-filled, but incredibly, monstrously familiar.
It was the voice of his father, who had died 10 years ago from lung cancer. "Jake," the creature whispered, "son, come here. Dad's cold. Dad's lonely." Jacob froze, icing over with terror. This wasn't crying, it was a trap. And then, with a loud, final clang, the protective damper in that very narrow spot he had crawled through slammed shut. The hum of the fan ceased, muffled by the thick metal barrier. His flashlight flickered once, twice, and went out, leaving him in the absolute crushing darkness of the bone ossuary. And ahead, a few meters away, in the light of the tablet's dying screen, the old child face of the monstrosity stretched into a smile, revealing black, decayed gums. Sound was his only companion, the rhythmic, metallic inhale-exhale of the ventilator. It drew air into his burnt, non-functioning lungs and pushed it back out. Miles couldn't move. His body, wrapped in sterile bandages like a mummy, lay on a special bed. He couldn't speak. A tracheostomy tube was in his throat. He could only blink and look. His room was on the 8th floor of the burn center. At night, when the main lights were turned off, only the dim night lighting by the floor remained, and the huge black window covering the entire wall. It became a mirror. It reflected his bed, the outlines of the equipment, and his own face, or what was left of it. The slit for his eyes in the bandages, the dark hole for the tube. And it also reflected what stood outside. He first noticed it 3 nights ago. In the reflection, in the depth of the black glass, beyond the contours of his bed, another figure appeared. Tall, thin, indistinct. It simply stood there. And then Miles, desperately trying to get the attention of the night nurse, Allison, began to blink, blinking in Morse code. SOS. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. He looked at the window while doing so, at the spot where the door was reflected. Allison noticed. She came over, her sweet, tired face appearing in his field of vision. "What is it, Miles? Does it hurt? Do you want me to close the curtains?" He blinked more desperately. SOS, looking past her at the window. She turned, looked into the dark glass, saw only her own reflection and the reflection of the room. She smiled at him, sadly. "There's no one there, honey. We're high up. Birds don't fly here." She adjusted his pillow and left. As soon as the door closed, it happened. In the reflection of the window, from the other side of the glass, at the height of the 8th floor where there could be no balcony or ledge, a hand appeared. Long, pale, almost phosphorescent in the dark. It slowly pressed its palm against the glass from the outside. The fingers were too long, the knuckles too prominent. Miles froze, his only working organ, his eyes widening in terror. The hand remained motionless, and then the creature behind the glass began to change. Its blurred features began to draw together, to rearrange. It was copying his face. Dark slits for eyes appeared in the right places. The outlines of bandages appeared on its own pale skin. It was putting on his burns, his deformity, his pain, like a grotesque mask. And at the center of this mask, in the spot where Miles had the tube, the creature had a gaping, deep black hole. Quietly, barely audible, the window glass cracked. But the crack didn't start from the outside, from an impact. It crawled from the inside, from the spot where the creature's reflection touched the glass, thin, spider-webbed but relentless. That night, the nightmare reached its peak. The creature behind the glass now almost fully matched his reflection, only larger, more distorted. And Miles, in his mute paralysis, saw the door to his room open. The doctor on duty, Dr. Evans, entered. He checked something on the monitor, then approached Miles. "Rough night, eh, Miles?" Dr. Evans said, in a calm voice. "You'll feel better soon." Miles wasn't listening. He was looking at the window. In the reflection, he saw his bed, himself, and empty space, where Dr. Evans stood in reality. The doctor wasn't in the reflection, but the creature behind the glass was, and now it was smiling, widely, unnaturally, its mask face stretched into a grimace. Dr. Evans sighed, walked around the room, and stopped at the window. He wasn't looking at the reflection, but straight through the glass, into the night's darkness. And then, slowly, perfectly calmly, he turned the handle, unlatched the lock. "Time to air it out," said Dr. Evans, and his voice now sounded alien, mechanical. "It smells of fear in here." He pulled the frame open. Cold night air rushed into the room, rustling the bandages, and with it flowed in that very same sweetish smell of decay that Miles had sensed these past nights. The creature outside the window, his tormentor double, didn't fall. It remained hanging in the air, and then, with a smooth, fluid motion, it seeped inside, flowing around Dr. Evans, who stood watching Miles with empty, unreflecting eyes. The creature approached the bed. Its mask face was now centimeters from Miles's face. From the black hole where a mouth should be came the smell of a grave's chill. Miles could see in the mirror of the window that both of them were reflected now, him tied to the bed and this creature leaning over him, and one more reflection, an empty one, where Dr. Evans stood, who now, smiling the same empty smile, quietly closed the window, locking them in together, forever. The dust in the basement archive of Greylock Hospital wasn't just dust. It was the mummified flesh of time. It hung in the still air in thick velvet layers, and with every movement Emma Grant made, it flared up in her flashlight beam, turning into golden swirls. She breathed it in, feeling the microscopic particles of parchment, skin, and old ink tickle her throat, persistent and rough. The air smelled of must, sweetish mold, and something else, dry, almost medicinal, like the smell of empty medicine bottles. Before her stretched endless shelves of folders, medical records from the 20s, 30s, 40s, yellow, brittle paper, rough to the touch, ink faded to the color of rust. She sorted through box after box, compiling a digital catalog. Routine, boring work, until she stumbled upon a folder stamped Special Cases, Ward 44. Inside were dozens of charts, different names, different diagnoses, different ages, but they were united by two facts: date of death, October 31st, time of death, 23:55, and the cause, neatly written in calligraphic hand, Mors per terrorem, death from terror. In the margins in Latin were notes, subjectus vidit quod videre non debuit, the subject saw what he should not have seen, cibus non consumptus, food not consumed. A cold academic shiver ran down Emma's spine. A serial killer? A mad doctor? With an excitement that smothered the budding fear, she began to look for a pattern, a name. She turned the fragile pages, and dust rose in columns, making her choke. And then her fingers brushed against paper of a different quality, newer, smoother. She pulled it out.
It was a modern electronic medical record, printed on a laser printer. The photo in the corner made her heart stop. It was her own face, smiling from last year's corporate photo. Name, Emma Grant. Date of birth, correct. And in the date of death field, it read today's date. Time, 23:55. Cause, mors per terrorem. At the bottom, again in Latin, archivum non est memoria, est menu, et ora cenandi advenit. The archive is not a memory, it is a menu, and the time for dinner has arrived. Emma flung the paper away as if burned. She jumped up, the chair clattering to the concrete floor. Her flashlight, slipping from her sweaty hands, rolled across the floor, its beam dancing madly over the shelves, and she saw what she had mistaken for faceless boxes and dark glass jars. They weren't jars, they were urns. Dozens, hundreds of cremation urns, neatly arranged on the shelves.
And in the reflection of the trembling light, in the dark glass of each urn, two tiny dim points flared and died for a moment, like eyes watching from behind the glass, from within the ashes. She dashed for the exit, a heavy metal door at the end of the aisle. Her feet sank into the carpet of dust. Gasping for breath, she crashed into the door, began yanking the handle. Locked from the inside, but she hadn't locked it. And then the light, that single flickering fluorescent lamp under the ceiling, went out for good. Absolute, thick, suffocating darkness crashed down on her. The silence became physical, pressing on her eardrums. And in that silence, Emma heard a new sound. A quiet, dry, multiple rustling, the rustle of ash shifting inside glass vessels, and a creaking, a slow, solemn creaking of urns turning on the shelves. They were turning toward her, all at once, and in the darkness, from the depths of each, that same pair of dim, hungry points ignited. Now they didn't go out. They approached, floated in the blackness, surrounding her. She pressed her back against the cold door, squeezed her eyes shut, but the points of light penetrated her eyelids. She understood the last line in her chart. She wasn't an archivist, she was a dish. And the archive, a vast, soulless pantry where those who had been eaten once waited their turn, and now it was their turn to feed others. The air smelled of ozone and ash, and somewhere very close, right in front of her face in the darkness, there came a quiet, dry, lipless smacking sound. A sharp, clean sound, a powerful microscope being turned on. Dr. Alan Foster's laboratory was a kingdom of sterile order. Bright, cold light, the hum of fume hoods, the smell of oxidized metal, alcohol, and the thin, caustic note of chemical reagents. On the table, under the powerful lens of a microscope, lay a slide with a sample, blood from patient in isolation ward number 3. The man was dying from something unseen, an extremely high fever, crystallization of lymph under the skin, uncontrollable muscle spasms. Alan adjusted the focus. On a cellular level, the picture was nightmarish but familiar, a virus destroying membranes. But something was off. He switched the microscope to maximum magnification, connected the digital analyzer. On the monitor screen, instead of chaotic chains of proteins and RNA, a structure appeared, ordered, geometric. He zoomed further. These weren't molecules in the usual sense. These were symbols, ancient angular runes familiar to him from academic works on Norse mythology. The rune Thurisaz, thorn, destruction; Hagalaz, hail, chaos; Nauthis, need, pain. They weren't just similar. They formed a sentence, an incantation etched into the very fabric of life.
The virus's DNA was a text that killed. Bioterrorism,
he whispered, and his voice sounded muffled in the empty laboratory. Someone created an information weapon, a message virus. He sat down at the computer to compile a report. His fingers flew across the keys, describing the terrible discovery. The agent is not transmitted via airborne droplets or fluids. Infection occurs through cognitive perception of the encoded information. It is enough to analyze, to understand the sequence of runes. He stopped. His fingers froze over the keyboard. A ringing silence filled his ears, drowning out the hum of the instruments. He had just read it and understood. An icy wave rolled through his body, from his tailbone to his skull. He felt it physically, a light, ticklish itch deep in his bone marrow, as if invisible letters had stirred there. He looked at his hands. They were pale, but still normal. "No," he groaned. "No, no!" He jumped up, grabbed the printout of his preliminary notes, ran to the fume hood where a gas burner was lit. He wanted to burn it all, destroy the information. Blue-yellow flame leapt up, greedily licking the paper, and at that moment his right hand released the sheet. Not him, his hand. It acted on its own. His muscles contracted in a spasm, not painful, but purposeful. His hand lowered, grabbed a lab marker lying on the table. His left hand, also disobedient, pressed a clean sheet of paper to the table. "Stop!" Alan screamed with his own voice, which no longer controlled his body. His hands worked. The marker moved across the paper with a dry rustle. He wasn't writing letters, he was drawing those same runes. Thurisaz, Hagalaz, Nauthiz. Then new ones, more complex, intertwining into a pattern that caused a headache just by looking at it. This was a continuation of the viral code. His own hands, his own brain, already infected and rewritten, were finishing the deadly message. He was a puppet, a biological printer. The last symbol was drawn with such pressure that the marker tore the paper. And suddenly, control returned. His hands went limp. The marker fell from his fingers. Alan, breathing heavily, staggered back from the table, staring at the horror he had created. And then his head slowly, mechanically turned. Not toward the door, not toward the window. It turned and lifted to look straight ahead, right to where, in ordinary life, another person might be, or a surveillance camera, or a listener. His face was covered in cold sweat, his eyes wide with madness and knowledge. His lips, not by his will, stretched into a grotesque, demonstrative smile. And he spoke. The voice was his, but the intonation alien, dead, didactic.
"I have already transmitted it to you," Dr. Alan Foster said quietly, clearly looking into the void, right at you. "I described the mechanism. I named the runes. You listened. You read. You understood. Knowledge is a vector. The agent is already in your head. It is rewriting your synapses right now. Do you feel a slight itch at the base of your skull? Dry mouth? That's it. You are listening to me, which means you are already a carrier. Welcome to the epidemic." He fell silent. The smile disappeared. His eyes filled with tears of horror and infinite pity for himself and for the one perceiving this now. Then he slowly brought his treacherous writing hands to his own throat, and his fingers began to squeeze. A sharp, loud click, a tape recorder being turned on, then the sound of heavy, nervous footsteps on empty linoleum. The dawn sun breaking through the high windows of Greylock Hospital's lobby wasn't golden, it was red, deep crimson, like dried blood on a surgical gown.
It cast long, distorted shadows, pulsating with the remnants of the night. Detective Nick Wayland stood in the middle of the empty lobby, clutching a tape recorder in his hand. His finger was on the record button. He had spent the entire night here, following the threads of the nightmare. Room 302, the pediatric ward, the archive. He had put it all together. Testimonies, however insane, evidence, however impossible. He knew the chief physician, old Dr. Milo, was at the center of this. He was the surgeon who stitched things together, the archivist who kept the menu, the one who had let something in from outside. Nick went up to Milo's office on the top floor. It was empty. On the desk lay a single folder labeled Wayland, N, Disposal Protocol. Nick's heart hammered. He rushed back down to the exit, to the main glass doors, beyond which a dew-covered parking lot and the world were visible. He pushed the handle. The doors wouldn't budge. He ran to the emergency exit in the doctor's lounge. Same story. The door to the basement didn't lead down, but to a long, faceless corridor that led him back to the lobby. He rammed it. He kicked at the emergency doors with green exit signs. They opened into other wards, into storage rooms, into dead ends, but never to the outside. The hospital had closed around him like an intestine. "It's drugs," he wheezed to himself, feeling clammy sweat on his back. A maze. Panic, pure and animal, overflowed. He drew his service pistol, stepped back a few paces from the main glass doors, and fired. The roar of the gunshots shattered the silence. A web of cracks spread across the impact-resistant glass. A second shot, a third. The glass finally gave way, collapsing inward, shattering into thousands of dull shards.
Icy morning air rushed into the lobby. Nick stepped over the frame, expecting to feel asphalt under his feet. But under his feet wasn't asphalt. It was linoleum. Cold, shiny hospital linoleum. He wasn't standing outside. He was standing in the center of a huge, brightly lit operating room. The blinding light of surgical lamps hit him right in the eyes. The sterile gleam of metal instruments, the hum of equipment. And in the center of the room, on the operating table, lay a man. He was naked to the waist. His chest was opened, spread apart with metal retractors. There were no organs inside. Instead, a jelly-like mass pulsed, shimmering with complex patterns connected to tanks of murky fluid and blinking devices. The patient's head was shaved, the skull opened. The brain, partially extracted, was also entwined with wires and thin tubes leading to a complex apparatus that clicked and hummed rhythmically. It was him, Nick Wayland. His own face, pale and lifeless, stared at the ceiling with empty eyes. The whole world collapsed. The universe shrank to this patch of reality. Leo, the nurse, Sarah, the therapist, Victor, the surgeon, Sam, the guard, Anna, the psychiatrist, the technician, the burn patient, the archivist, the infectious disease specialist, all of them, all their fears, their discoveries, their deaths, that entire long, endless night shift. These weren't stories, they were signals, electrical impulses, the last desperate, chaotic surges of fading consciousness, hallucinations of a brain that was dying, trying to comprehend its own end, trying to assemble some kind of story from scraps of memory and fear before plunging into nothingness. Nick, the one standing on his feet, the ghost, the phantom, made a sound somewhere between a moan and a chuckle. He approached the table, looking into his own dead eyes. And then a figure in a surgical gown and mask stepped out from behind him, the surgeon. He approached the table, to that real body. His hands in blue gloves were empty. He wasn't going to operate anymore. Everything was already over. The surgeon looked at the phantom Nick standing nearby. Then, With a slow, almost tender motion, he brought his fingers to the ties of his surgical mask. He untied them. The mask slipped off. Beneath it, there was no face, no eyes, nose, mouth. There was only smooth, pale, featureless skin, like that of a wax doll. The faceless surgeon leaned down. He leaned not toward the body on the table. He leaned toward Nick himself, toward the consciousness that still clung to its phantom form. He brought his empty head close to Nick's ear and whispered. The whisper was dry, like the rustle of parched leaves, and penetrated directly to the very core, beyond the ears. "The rescue operation has failed," whispered the nothing.
Consciousness cannot be preserved. Neural connections irreversibly lost. Time for disposal. The faceless surgeon straightened up and took a step toward the wall, where red and green lights glowed on a panel. His hand rested on a large steel switch. Nick, the ghost, the thought, the memory, wanted to scream, wanted to object, but he had no voice, no body, nothing but the last paralyzing understanding of this entire, endless, meaningless night. The switch clicked down. The sound of shutdown. Absolute, all-consuming silence. Not silence from the absence of sound. Silence as a state. Silence as eternity. Welcome to the eternal shift.